This is a 2020 Ducati Panigale V2, Ducati's baby sport bike. And today we're going to find out why this sub 160 horsepower bike costs more than most new leader bikes. I've borrowed this Panigale V2 from Austin Jones, and you could check out his channel at Jones Bros Garage, and you could also follow him on Instagram at Jones Bros Garage. First, to catch you up on the history that led to the Ducati Panigale V2. Ducati made the 749 with a 748cc 90-degree V-twin from 2003 to 2006. That bike was then replaced with the Ducati 848, which had a 849cc 90-degree V-twin from the years of 2008 to 2013. Next came the 899 Panigale, produced from 2013 to 2015 with a 898cc V-twin. The 959 Panigale then replaced the 899 in 2016 with a 950cc 90-degree L-twin motor. And finally, in 2020, the 959 was replaced with this, the Panigale V2. First, I'm going to show you all the quirks and features of an exotic middleweight Ducati. And then I'm going to get it out on the road and go for a ride. And then I'm going to give it an Austin score. Starting at the cockpit of the Panigale V2, the first thing you will notice is the seat. The V2 sports a suede seat for maximum grip, and so that you don't have to ride on a vinyl seat like lesser sport motorcycles. Next, coming to the controls, you will notice a button below the turn signal and light labeled Mode and Enter. This is so that you can navigate the settings on the 4.3-inch full-color TFT dash. On the opposite bar, you will notice the start switch, which starts the bike by pushing all the way down, rather than most motorcycles which have a kill switch and an engine start button. Under the start switch, you will notice the hazard light button, in case you need to activate the hazard lights on your Panigale V2. Between the bars, you will notice this shock that runs across the triple tree. This is a steering stabilizer that is designed to help keep the front stable and prevent tank slappers, which you will sometimes see on motorcycles that are set off balance. Above the steering stabilizer, you will see the full-color 4.3-inch TFT dash, which has a night and day mode for maximum visibility. Now, the first thing you will notice about the body of this bike is just how many times it says the word Ducati. For example, under the front windscreen, on the front fender, on the grips, the other grip, the tank, the other side of the tank, the back seat rest, the rear fender again, the gas cap, the motor. If I counted correctly, that's 11 Ducati logos, meaning this is unmistakably a Ducati. Coming around to the front of the bike, you will see this interesting headlight design. But what's really interesting are these two large holes underneath the lights. These are air intakes designed to maximize air intake to the Ducati's motor. And they also help keep with the elegant and refined styling of the Ducati Panigale. And take a look at just how beefy these front brakes are, made by Brembo. The next thing you will notice about the Ducati is the crazy exhaust design. Not only is there a cut in this bottom fender, but you can see the exhaust wrapping around underneath the seat. The next thing you will surely notice if you are into motorcycles is this, the single-sided swing arm. See, most motorcycles have a swing arm on both sides, but the Ducati utilizes a single-sided swing arm, meaning only one side of the bike has a swing arm. And instead of the rear shock being where the exhaust is, it's mounted on the side of the motorcycle. Another interesting thing to point out, as caused by the single-sided swing arm and the exhaust cutout, is that this bike is very unsymmetrical. This side of the bike looks very different than that side of the bike. Now, coming around to the back of the Ducati Panigale V2, you will notice this wraparound taillight design, which in my opinion looks very nice. The one thing you will notice is the Ducati Panigale V2 is not a very practical motorcycle. In its current form, the owner has the rear pegs and the rear seat removed, meaning that not only is there no passenger seat, but there's no underseat storage either. Perhaps the biggest quirk of the Panigale V2 is right here, the motor. Most powerful sport bikes in today's market are inline 4-cylinders, but this bike is a V-twin or an L-twin. Same difference. But what that means is this 955cc motor has a lot of low-end torque. So those are the quirks and features of the Ducati Panigale V2. Now let's get it on the road and go for a ride. Go ahead and give it some throttle. Wow, this thing takes off like a rocket. Wow, really is impressive. It's crazy how far bikes have come in just the past 20-25 years. 25 years ago, this would have been the fastest bike in the world, or at least one of them, you know. And now people consider this underpowered for what it costs, you know. It doesn't match up with a liter bike, a little bit shy. But this bike isn't really meant to match up with a liter bike as far as power. This bike is more of a 750 class, kind of between a 1000 and a 600. And I think it fills that gap perfectly. And there's not many bikes in that class. In fact, the only other one I could think of is the Gixxer 750, but that's entirely different than a Ducati. Wow, that low end torque. That low end torque is really noticeable. I'm really impressed with the handling of this bike. Just how light it feels, and the tank is so thin. Some modern bikes are just built so wide on the tank specifically, which is great because you could get a better grip on them with your legs, but the thinness of this bike really makes it feel smaller than it is, and there's no problem at all getting a good grip on it. See, it's hard riding a bike like this because all you ever want to do is go fast. Wow. As far as the comfort goes, you're definitely hunched over on this thing. And I could feel it starting to get a little toasty, but you're definitely hunched over. It's not quite as bad as like a typical 600 or liter bike, actually. The seating position is actually somewhat comfortable for a sport bike, but compared to a cruiser or a regular bike, it's night and day. You definitely feel some strain on your neck and your wrists, but I guess that just comes with the package. And so that's the Panigale V2, Ducati's entry-level super sport motorcycle. And now it's time to give it an Austin score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling. The Panigale V2 is gorgeous and extremely elegant, but there's a limited number of color choices, and so it gets a 9 out of 10. Acceleration is brutal, but not as brutal as a V4 or a liter bike in power band, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Handling is incredible, and the bike is super light on its feet. The narrow tank makes the bike feel smaller than it is, and it gets a 9 out of 10. For fun factor, this bike is fun to ride and can be an adrenaline rush, but it isn't as ludicrous as its bigger brother V4, and so it gets a 7 out of 10. For cool factor, this bike is a Ducati, and it gets attention everywhere it goes. but it's still not quite as cool as the V4, and it gets a 9 out of 10. That brings the Panigale V2 to a 41 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. For features, the V2 is packed with technology not often seen in its category, but it lacks cruise control, and it gets a 9 out of 10. For comfort, the Panigale is pretty comfortable for a track-oriented motorcycle, but it still has a hunched over position and it can get pretty warm, and so it gets a 5 out of 10. For quality, the V2 is built with premium parts, and it is a far cry from pre-Volkswagen Group Ducatis, and so it gets an 8 out of 10. For practicality, this bike has no storage space whatsoever, a large turning radius, and no passenger seat, and it gets a 1 out of 10. For value, you get a lot of premium features for the price of this Ducati Panigale V2, and a very cool bike. But it still lacks a lot of power compared to other bikes in its price range, and it gets a 6 out of 10. For a total score of 29 out of 50. And the Austin score is 70 out of 100. Wow.